And tell me what we would be looking at immediately to see how Kwasi Kwarteng's announcements are going down and what we will see when we look at those things.
Okay, well, the first thing we've seen is a pretty massive sell-off in the pound. So the pound has plummeted in its international value. And the second thing we've seen...
Hang on, why would people be doing that? What does that tell us about the markets? Is that the correct word to use? How the markets response to Kwasi?
Basically saying they don't like our currency anymore because they think it's going to inflate.
Right. That's not good, is it?
No.
How bad is it?
It's pretty bad because not only do they not want to hold our currency anymore because they think it's going to inflate, they also aren't too keen on holding our government's debt because they think our government's going to struggle to pay it back. And so for that reason, they are also selling off gilts and the yields on them, which is kind of the opposite of the price. The price is falling,
yes.
The yield is rising, and that means government's borrowing costs are going through the roof.
And we know that the figure of 60 billion was bandied around today to pay for the energy bailouts, albeit that it's a postponement of payment for taxpayers or a redirection of funds. It's not a windfall tax on the energy firms because she ruled that out quite early on. So that means the money that the government needs to borrow to do all the things that it's planning to do is going to cost them and therefore us a heck of a lot more than it would have done before they announced what they were going to do.
Exactly right, yeah. And I think I should point out that the message I'm getting from the markets is it's not the energy bailout that's bothering them. They're seeing that as a short-term fix.
Well, it's a genuine emergency, isn't it?
A genuine emergency.
Yes.
They're not having a problem with that. What they're having a problem with is the swathe of unfunded tax cuts that are supposed to kickstart growth when there's no real evidence that they do so. And if it doesn't work, then these things will be unsustainable over the longer term.
So this is probably what the Office of Budgetary Responsibility would have said if Kwasi Kwarteng had allowed them to say what they exist to say in the context of statements like today's. But instead, the markets have done their own number crunching and their own analysis, and they have concluded that, well, to read a headline on Bloomberg UK from a few moments ago, Truss's economic plan sends UK markets into meltdown.
Yeah, that's essentially it. That in the absence of the OBR doing this, the IFS had a go at it yesterday, and they will come out with their statement later, which I imagine will be along similar lines to the markets, really. But as ever, the markets got there first and said, we don't like the currency because it's going to inflate. We don't like the gilts because the government's going to be borrowing a huge amount of money, far more than we expected. And we basically don't like this very much at all.
So apart from secretly funded lobby groups masquerading as think tanks, who we tend not to pay lip service to on this programme, although the minute they reveal who funds them, we'll be more than happy to give them a seat at the table, where might I go for a more upbeat analysis of what Kwasi Kwarteng has just announced?
I am quite struggling to find one, I have to say. I am not seeing anybody being very positive about this except for Tory party supporters. And as you say...
who were also cheering the polar opposite policy 6 months ago.
Well, exactly. I mean, I was quite amused by Kwasi Kwarteng standing up and saying this is a new era. And of course, the Labour benches fell about laughing. The Tories have been in power for 12 years. And in that time, we have swung from austerity to fix the deficit and bring down debt to levelling up, lots of investment in infrastructure to bring up growth in the regions, to now unfunded tax cuts for the rich to do trickle-down economics. They're not exactly being consistent.
Do you think they believe that this will have I mean, you have to believe that they believe that this will work, don't you? The alternative is too bleak and cynical. I mean, it's just like we've got 2 more years in power. Let's enrich as many of our mates as we possibly can, as much as we humanly...
Well, if I was being completely cynical,
yes.
I would say this does actually remind me a little of Osborne in the run-up to the couple of years before the 2015 election, when he was doing various bits of jiggery-pokery with the fiscal finances, supporting the housing market and so forth, in order to create an economic boom in time for the next election. And if I was being completely cynical, I would say that these kind of tax cuts tend to bring about short-term growth.
Okay.
and then there's a bit like a sugar high, and then there's a crash later, which just might happen just in time for the next election. The question is, the problem is, though, that it might also generate extremely high inflation, and it won't deal with problems like the crisis in the NHS and so forth, and people might care more about that than they do about a short-term economic boom.